Click. It is the sound of a padlock securing the gate on my own property. The grind of boots on gravel follows as a hired guard departs, confining me to my own land as if I were a convict. The faint smell of diesel fumes lingers in the mountain atmosphere from trucks now unable to reach their homes. Imagine the scene. You are a headstrong 58-year-old widower who has spent his entire life fighting for this land, quietly living on the property your grandfather bequeathed to you. Then along comes Victoria, with her clipboard and a self-satisfied smirk, to declare your cabin substandard and physically lock you within your own neighborhood. A grave error. You see, the one detail Victoria and her associates neglected to investigate was the weathered concrete bridge that serves as the community's primary access. That bridge, the single connection for 47 high-end homes to the rest of the world, is something I own, down to the last square inch. My name is Ezra Blackwood, and 6 months ago, I was convinced the worst event of my life had already occurred. My wife, Margaret, passed away after 4 decades of marriage, carving a void in my heart as vast as Colorado. I responded as any shattered man might. I fled, leaving behind our suburban Denver existence to inhabit my grandfather's old cabin at Pine Ridge Estates. Here, in the mountains, the fragrance of pine and frost still clings to the land he once owned. The mountainside is dotted with 47 luxurious houses, all connected to the outside by a single concrete bridge. It was my bridge, though I was not yet aware of that fact. The majority of the residents are weekend visitors or retirees emulating a frontiersman lifestyle in designer flannel. A handful of us are year-round inhabitants who prefer to keep to ourselves. We once had a casual HOA that primarily managed snow removal. The operative word is had. Then came Victoria Thornfield, age 52, a recent transplant from Denver, accompanied by her smug lawyer husband, Marcus, and their entitled son, Bradley, who looked at my property as if it were a trophy to be won. Victoria held a singular, steadfast conviction. She was destined to lord over common people. The rumor was that she coveted my land for a developer's special project, luxury condominiums with sweeping mountain vistas. In under 6 months, Victoria had maneuvered her way into the HOA presidency. Her stated goal was to elevate community standards, which in reality meant expelling anyone who did not conform to her idealized suburban vision. The sharp tap of her designer shoes on my wooden porch signaled her initial visit. She wore a cream-colored pantsuit and carried a leather portfolio. Bradley stood behind her, smirking as though the entire situation was merely a game. "Mr. Blackwood," she began, foregoing any pleasantries, "I am here to discuss your property's compliance problems." I surveyed my grandfather's 40 acres, the hand-built log cabin, the workshop where 3 generations had mended everything from tractors to broken hearts, and the gardens that had sustained our family since the 1940s. "What problems?" She opened her portfolio with the air of a prosecutor. "Your cabin requires a new coat of paint. The workshop is an eyesore. Those gardens are unsuitable for a community of this stature. To be blunt, the whole look is diminishing property values. I am not a person who angers quickly. Margaret often remarked that I possessed the patience of a holy man and the obstinacy of a mule. Yet, as I listened to this woman disparage the work of 3 generations of my family, the creak of my grandfather's antique rocking chair seemed to carry cautionary notes on the mountain breeze. "This cabin has stood in my family for 80 years, I stated calmly. "My grandfather constructed it with his own 2 hands. My father raised me in this very place. You expect me to alter it because it doesn't align with your suburban ideals?" Victoria's smile was as sharp as a shard of glass. "Mr. Blackwood, we all harbor sentimental feelings, but progress demands sacrifice. I am certain you can appreciate that." "I appreciate it completely." "The answer is no." She shut the portfolio with a decisive snap. Behind her, Bradley snickered. "We will see about that." 2 weeks later, a formal envelope landed in my mailbox. An unnamed resident had lodged complaints with Jefferson County regarding unpermitted structures on my land. The county inspector, an anxious young man who repeatedly apologized, clarified that every structure required up-to-date permits and architectural surveys. The bitter tang of my morning coffee soured as I tallied the $3,200 in fees for permits on buildings that had existed longer than most Pine Ridge residents had been alive. This was Victoria's initial volley. But there was something she didn't grasp about the Blackwood family. We do not yield to bullies. My grandfather battled claim jumpers in these very mountains. My father confronted corrupt county officials attempting to seize our water rights. That evening, seated in the workshop amidst 80 years of family heritage, I knew Victoria Thornfield had chosen a fight with the wrong individual. Her insults stung more than the mountain wind, but I had no intention of letting her triumph. She believed she was confronting a grieving old fool who would simply pack his bags and vanish. She was oblivious to the person she had provoked. Victoria did not pause to relish her permit triumph. A mere 3 days after I signed that $3,200 check, she made her next move. On this occasion, she enlisted a surveyor, her brother-in-law, of course, to reevaluate the official property lines. I was sipping my morning coffee when the whir of surveying instruments pierced the mountain quiet. From my kitchen window, I observed Victoria's brother-in-law, wearing the same smug expression as she did, positioning his subpar transit on what I was certain was my land. "Morning," I called out, approaching with my coffee still emitting steam in the brisk air. "Would you mind explaining what you're up to on my property?" Victoria's brother-in-law possessed the surveying acumen of a malfunctioning GPS and double the hubris. "We're resurveying the community green space," he remarked, without lifting his gaze. "It appears there has been some misunderstanding regarding the boundaries." "There's no misunderstanding on my end. My property extends 20 feet beyond that oak tree. It's been that way since 1943, well before this community was established." He finally met my eyes, that familiar smirk stretching as if he were savoring a private joke. "Well, our instruments indicate you've been encroaching on community land for years. It's remarkable what modern equipment can uncover." The junior assistant appeared uneasy, continually reviewing his notes and shifting his gaze between his superior and me. A perceptive young man. He could sense the deception, even if he lacked the courage to address it. In a matter of hours, Victoria's brother-in-law had found that my property line was suddenly 20 feet shorter than it had been for the last 80 years. By the following afternoon, a team was erecting an 8-foot privacy fence, not along the contested boundary, but a full 15 feet inside my property. The thud of fence posts being hammered into the frozen earth reverberated like rifle shots across the mountain. Each post felt like an assault on Margaret's memory. Yet, I was determined not to let Victoria prevail in this contest of psychological warfare. The fence cut off my family's access to a hiking trail and was placed to perfectly block the morning sun from my workshop, disrupting 80 years of Blackwood family customs with surgical spite. Mrs. Holloway materialized at my side around 3 p.m., holding a thermos of hot coffee and displaying the troubled look of someone who has witnessed enough small-town power plays to foresee the outcome. "This is not right, Ezra," she murmured, giving my arm a surprisingly firm squeeze. "That fence is obviously on your property. We support you, dear." She then cast a worried look toward Victoria's home, where curtains stirred in an upstairs window, before quickly departing as if afraid of being seen associating with the opposition. That evening, I contacted Becker & Associates, the most reputable surveying company in the county. Tom Becker himself had surveyed half the properties in Jefferson County, including several that ended up in litigation. It set me back $800, funds I could ill afford. But by Friday morning, I possessed irrefutable evidence that Victoria's fence was situated 15 feet within my property line. This is where my 4 decades of engineering experience came into play. Having spent a career constructing bridges, dams, and roads, you come to understand that critical information often lies in old, forgotten documents. Infrastructure retains a memory, and that memory is stored in county courthouses and dusty filing cabinets. On Saturday morning, I dedicated hours to sifting through my grandfather's file boxes in the workshop, examining papers I hadn't seen since I moved here. The rustle of aged paper unveiled a true find: Grandpa's original 1943 mining claim, which included what was termed an exclusive easement for bridge and road maintenance, the sole route into and out of Pine Ridge. A visit to the courthouse on Monday morning verified what the yellowed documents hinted at. Every legal document filed since 1978 referenced the existing concrete bridge as being located on a private easement granted by the East Blackwood estate. The bridge that everyone used without a second thought. the one connecting all 47 luxury homes to civilization, was mine. Meanwhile, Victoria was not idle. She convened an emergency HOA meeting for Tuesday evening, alleging that I was in blatant disregard of community standards and seeking a $500 monthly penalty for my supposed illegal encroachment. The hum of the fluorescent fixtures in the community center cast a deathly pallor on everyone as Victoria advanced through slides on her laptop, like a corporate hatchet man announcing quarterly downsizing. Most of the residents remained quiet, partly out of fear of being her next victim and partly just staying away to evade choosing a side. "Mr. Blackwood has been trespassing on community green space for years," she declared, with the confidence of someone who has never faced a challenge. "His unlawful encroachment must be rectified at once, with monthly fines until he complies." My hands trembled slightly as I rose, not from anxiety, but from the exertion of reining in my temper. My voice, however, remained perfectly steady. "Victoria, I believe there's been a misunderstanding. The survey is perfectly clear, Mr. Blackwood." "Oh, it's clear, all right." I proceeded to the front of the room, produced my independent survey, and laid it out on the table. This survey, performed by Becker and Associates, people who are competent with surveying tools, proves your fence is 15 feet on my land. Victoria's face flushed to the shade of a ripe tomato. "That's impossible." "What's impossible is how your brother-in-law obtained his surveying license." A crackerjack box. A ripple of nervous laughter went through the room. Old Mr. Jenkins coughed, saying just loud enough for all to hear, "She's finally overstepped." Victoria snapped her laptop shut with such force I expected the screen to break. "The community has voted 7-2. You have 30 days to comply or be subject to escalating daily fines." I gave a calm nod and made for the exit, then paused and looked back with the sort of grin that had unsettled rival contractors for 4 decades. "Victoria, you may want to verify who is the actual owner of that bridge you crossed to get here this evening." Spoiler, it isn't the HOA. The expression of bafflement and creeping dread on her face was worth every cent of those permit fees. Victoria's reaction to my hint about the bridge was both swift and petty, akin to observing a toddler with a law degree having a tantrum. By Thursday morning, she had initiated 3 separate campaigns of harassment. The mailbox conflict came first. A certified letter stated that my hand-carved wooden mailbox, which I had crafted from oaks sourced from my own property, failed to adhere to community aesthetic guidelines. I was required to substitute it with an approved model from Mountain Vista Landscaping within 10 days. I phoned Mountain Vista out of sheer curiosity. The proprietor was Bradley Thornfield, Victoria's delightful son, who had seemingly transitioned from college dropout to mailbox tycoon. The cost for their standard community mailbox was $340 for what appeared to be a $40 plastic box from Home Depot adorned with fancy lettering. Victoria had elevated nepotism to an art. It was a shame she chose the wrong craftsman to swindle. The scent of wood stain permeated my workshop as I dedicated the weekend to constructing a mailbox that would impress the Smithsonian. It featured hand-carved mountain vistas, weather-sealed cedar, and bronze fittings, surpassing every stipulation in their guidelines and costing me only $30 in materials. Victoria's response: wood was not professional enough for Pine Ridge's image. Apparently, craftsmanship had become a violation. Following that were the garbage can shenanigans. Pine Ridge Waste Management abruptly began to miss my collection, citing route efficiency optimization. It was curious how my trash can was the only one optimized clean off their route. The sound of my boots on the gravel became my Tuesday morning routine as I transported my trash to the community dumpster, which Victoria had thoughtfully moved to a remote corner of the development. The garbage truck driver, a man named Pete, took me aside one morning. "This is from Mrs. Thornfield," he murmured, looking around cautiously. "The lady called my supervisor and made threats about our contract." "I'm sorry, man." Then came the harassment over my firewood. An anonymous report alleged that my extensive firewood pile posed a fire risk. Fire Marshal Rodriguez, a good man ensnared in Victoria's schemes, was obliged to inspect my neatly arranged cords. "This is the most orderly wood pile in the county," he remarked, shaking his head. "Someone is exploiting my department as their personal tool for revenge." But this is where Victoria miscalculated. She began circulating rumors at Murphy's Diner, loud enough for Sarah Chun, a property rights lawyer having lunch, to hear every detail about how my non-compliant cabin was plummeting property values. Sarah contacted me that afternoon. Mr. Blackwood, I couldn't help but overhear some troubling patterns of harassment. Would you be open to discussing your legal recourse over coffee? While Victoria acted as the mailbox autocrat, I was methodically assembling my case. Each exchange was recorded with military-like precision. Every phone call was taped. Colorado is a one-party consent state, and I was certainly consenting. I obtained 5 years of HOA meeting minutes, uncovering Victoria's greatest hits. The Kowalskis were badgered about their landscaping until they left. Mrs. Patterson was cited for health violations concerning her cat until she relocated to an assisted living facility. The Garcias endured months of torment over their vegetable garden before selling their home at a loss. Victoria was not merely a bully. She was a serial property predator. The truly explosive revelation, however, emerged when Sarah began investigating the bridge maintenance contract. County records indicated that $180,000 was paid annually to Pine Ridge Community Infrastructure LLC for bridge maintenance. And who owned that LLC? I'll give you a single clue. Her name rhymes with Victoria. For 15 years, this woman had been misappropriating my bridge maintenance funds, amounting to $2.7 million plus interest, along with the gratification of knowing I could lawfully dismantle her entire operation with a single phone call. The rustle of legal papers became my evening lullaby as Sarah detailed my most powerful options. Ezra, this is no longer just harassment. We are now dealing with wire fraud, embezzlement, and racketeering. Victoria's desperation became evident when she convened another emergency meeting, proposing a special assessment to purchase my problematic property for exactly $3,200, the very sum for the permits she had compelled me to acquire. It was daylight robbery with a gavel and a smile. The meeting was sparsely attended. Victoria's campaign of intimidation had made people afraid to attend. Yet, Mrs. Holloway entered as if she were leading a charge on Normandy, with the Rodriguez family and Jake Morrison behind her. This harassment must end, Mrs. Holloway proclaimed, standing with more resolve than people half her age. Ezra Blackwood is a good man, and we all are aware of it. Victoria's facade crumbled. Mrs. Holloway, perhaps you fail to grasp what is at risk. I grasp bullying perfectly, the elderly woman retorted. I have survived it for 83 years. The anticipation of triumph was more delicious than Margaret's apple pie as I observed Victoria's empire begin to fracture. I remained silent, however, taking notes. At times, the most effective strategy is to allow one's adversaries to ensnare themselves in their own schemes. After the meeting, Jake Morrison grabbed my arm in the parking lot. Ezra, whatever your plan is, I'm with you. We've all had it. Mrs. Holloway nodded in agreement. It's time to show Victoria who is truly in charge of this mountain. I shook their hands, my thoughts on that bridge and the $2.7 million in pilfered funds. Victoria assumed she was in a chess match with a grieving old widower. She had no clue she was tangling with a demolitions expert. Victoria's subsequent action demonstrated a complete loss of rational thought. Instead of retreating after the calamitous community meeting, she escalated her efforts, like a gambler in Vegas staking their mortgage on a losing bet. On Monday morning, I was awakened by the sounds of construction. Not the soft hammering of a neighbor mending a fence, but the industrial clamor of metal gates and electronic devices being set up at the entrance to our community. By midday, Pine Ridge was equipped with its own electronic gate system, featuring keypads, cameras, and a guard booth that seemed more fitting for Guantanamo Bay. Victoria stood next to it in her designer coat, issuing orders to the workers like Napoleon positioning his artillery, if Napoleon had sported Louboutins and held a clipboard. A security enhancement, she declared to all who would listen, for the protection of everyone. The crucial part was that my access code mysteriously ceased to function that very afternoon. I came back from an errand to find myself barred from my own neighborhood. The gate's red light blinked at me like a mechanical insult, and the intercom emitted the voice of a hired guard who had obviously been given his instructions. "Sorry, sir. There's a system malfunction," he stated, his apology as sincere as a tax auditor's. "It will be several days before it's fixed. You might try calling the HOA president." The acrid taste of pure fury filled my mouth as I remained in my truck. observing my neighbors passing through with codes that functioned without issue. This had gone beyond simple harassment. Victoria had transformed my residence into Alcatraz, with me as the sole inmate. Mrs. Holloway lowered her car window, her expression suggesting she was ready to charge the gate with a rolling pin. "Ezra, this is illegal. I'm calling that woman immediately." "No need to worry," I replied, capturing images of everything with my phone. "She's just served me a felony case on a silver platter." While Victoria reveled in her electronic enclosure, I was on the phone with Sarah Chun, who almost choked on her coffee as I detailed the scenario. "She has confined you, Ezra. That is unlawful restraint. She has escalated from civil harassment to criminal offenses more quickly than one can say incompetent criminal." Deputy Martinez showed up within the hour, assessed the gate blocking my driveway, and shook his head as if he had witnessed every form of human folly. "Ma'am," he addressed Victoria, "you cannot hold a property owner captive on his own land. That constitutes false imprisonment, which is a felony." Victoria's reply was the epitome of an entitled suburbanite. "Officer, I'm certain you do not grasp the legal intricacies of HOA management and community safety measures." "Lady, I grasp handcuffs," Martinez retorted. "Open the gate this instant." This, however, was when I deployed my ultimate strategy. As Victoria bickered with the deputy, Sarah was busy filing emergency injunctions and notifying the Colorado Department of Transportation about discrepancies in bridge maintenance funding. CDOT does not take lightly to missing highway funds. Within 48 hours, a forensic accountant named Williams was examining Pine Ridge's financial records with the meticulousness of a coroner at a suspicious death scene. His discoveries elevated Victoria's string of minor offenses into a federal investigation. Her family had been managing Pine Ridge like the Corleone family managed Las Vegas. If the Corleones had worn cardigans and driven Lexus SUVs. The brother-in-law's surveying work, $200,000 in fictitious charges. Son Bradley's landscaping, $150,000 in overstated contracts. Husband Marcus's legal services, $89,000 for standard paperwork that should have been $5,000. Including the bridge payments, Victoria had purloined over $3.5 million from her own neighbors. That evening, the distinct drone of industrial shredders emanated from Victoria's residence. Someone was evidently conducting a late-night document disposal. It was a shame for them that Williams had already retrieved everything from the county's digital records. The community's response was akin to a dam breaking. Jake Morrison called for an emergency gathering at Murphy's Diner, and 23 residents appeared with receipts, invoices, and anecdotes that would make a prosecutor's mouth water. "She billed us $8,000 for urgent road work," fumed the Garcias. "It was just her nephew patching a pothole with some gravel." Mrs. Patterson's daughter came from Denver with a binder of fraudulent invoices. "My mom was charged $3,000 for community lighting improvements. I found the identical solar lights at Walmart for $89. A murmur of angry voices swelled in the diner as resident after resident understood they had been bankrolling Victoria's lifestyle for years. The woman had not only stolen their money, but also their trust, tranquility, and sense of community. Yet Victoria was not one to go down without a fight. Her panicked reaction was to call for an emergency Friday meeting to insist the community buy the bridge rights from me for $50,000, approximately 1% of her total theft. By Thursday, local journalist Kate Morrison was investigating, asking about financial misconduct in mountain HOAs. The Jefferson County Tribune was preparing a front-page story. Queen of the Mountain: How One Woman Stole a Community's Soul. On Friday evening, I sat on my porch, watching the sunset cast a golden hue on the mountains, reflecting on my grandfather's honest bridge and the web of deceit built upon it. The following night, Victoria Thornfield would learn what occurs when you back a Blackwood into a corner on his own mountain. This was going to be enjoyable. The revelation that altered everything arrived on Tuesday morning inside a manila envelope, so substantial it could have stopped a door. Sarah Chun and her forensic accountant had been diligently working, and their findings made Victoria's gate escapade seem like a minor infraction. "Ezra," Sarah's voice crackled over the phone, her excitement barely contained. "You should probably sit down for this, and perhaps get something stronger than coffee." The financial audit showed Victoria hadn't merely been pilfering community money. She had been orchestrating a criminal operation that made the Sopranos seem like inexperienced thieves. The bridge maintenance fraud was only the beginning of a banquet of deceit. The sound of papers filled my kitchen as I laid out Sarah's report on my grandfather's old oak table. Every single improvement project over an 8-year period had been either inflated, fabricated, or entirely non-existent. The snow removal contract. Victoria's cousin billed $40,000 a year for services valued at $8,000. Emergency septic work. Her brother-in-law's plumbing business charged $75,000 to replace systems that were in perfect working order. Even the community newsletter was a scam, costing $15,000 annually for what was essentially Victoria's personal propaganda publication. Marcus's law firm had charged for legal advice that primarily involved instructing Victoria on new methods of theft. Bradley's landscaping company was created for the sole purpose of transforming $20 of daisies into $500 bills. The young man couldn't cultivate mold, but he was an expert at cultivating invoices. The total plunder from community funds was $847,000, in addition to the $2.7 million from bridge payments. But it was here that Sarah uncovered the crucial detail that explained it all. Tucked away in property records from 1962, she found the true motive for Victoria's campaign against me. My grandfather's initial 40-acre plot had encompassed Victoria's current property. He had lost it in a poker game to her late father-in-law, Theodore Thornfield, Sr. According to family lore, my grandfather had always believed he was cheated but had no way to prove it. A busted straight hand beaten by a suspiciously timely full house. The acrid taste of a 60-year-old deception filled my mouth as the whole story fell into place. Victoria had been aware of my ownership of the bridge from the very beginning. Her entire campaign of harassment was not driven by a desire for community standards. It was retaliation for a poker game that predated color TV, all concealed within the largest HOA fraud in Colorado's history. The criminal scheme was breathtaking in its complexity. Williams, the forensic accountant, dubbed it organized crime in cardigans, a methodical plunder disguised as community enhancement. It involved forged invoices, non-existent work orders, and kickback arrangements buried within legitimate contracts. Victoria's desperation was becoming apparent in real time. Marcus had discreetly initiated divorce proceedings 2 weeks prior, claiming irreconcilable differences. Lawyers speak for, "My wife is a criminal, and I'm getting out before I'm arrested too." Bradley had been desperately attempting to move funds from his business accounts, only to find the IRS had frozen them all during an audit. It seemed the thought of paying taxes on illicit gains hadn't crossed the mind of the landscaping prodigy. The balance of power had shifted dramatically. Victoria was no longer the aggressor pursuing an isolated widower. She was a trapped embezzler confronting federal indictments, civil suits, and the complete implosion of her fraudulent empire. The sound of gravel crunching in my driveway signaled the arrival of County Commissioner Walsh, who looked as though he would prefer to fight a bear than engage in this conversation. "Mr. Blackwood," he began, holding his hat in his hands, "we must talk about the Friday meeting. Certain irregularities have come to light that need immediate attention." Irregularities? That's like calling the Hindenburg a minor thermal event. "Commissioner," I said, extending an offer of coffee, "what we ought to be discussing is how Pine Ridge is going to choose a new HOA board and get back $3.5 million in stolen money." His relief was almost palpable. The county had been sidestepping Victoria's political influence for years. Now, they had a victim ready to stand up and evidence that would bring tears of joy to a prosecutor's eyes. Friday night was no longer going to be about who owned the bridge. It was set to be Victoria Thornfield's very public and permanent ruin. Margaret used to say that justice is patient. She neglected to mention how deeply satisfying it is when it finally arrives. On Wednesday morning, my grandfather's workshop was converted into a command center that would impress the Pentagon. Sarah Chin showed up at sunrise with 2 briefcases overflowing with evidence and a smile keen enough to cut steel. "Ezra," she declared, laying out documents on my workbench as a general would plan an invasion, "Victoria Thornfield has just dealt us the legal version of a royal flush. It's time to push all our chips in and watch her capitulate." My team was small, but more lethal than a den of rattlesnakes. It included Sarah Chun, a property rights lawyer with 2 decades of experience dismantling corrupt HOAs. Miguel Santos, a forensic accountant, an ex-FBI white-collar crime expert who had dismantled 3 Ponzi schemes and 1 notoriously crooked casino. Rebecca Stone, a civil rights attorney working pro bono, motivated by a lifetime of seeing small-town despots oppress honest citizens. And my secret weapon. Retired Judge Hamilton Gray, an old Army comrade who was familiar with every legal loophole in Colorado and a few that weren't even officially recorded. The scent of fresh coffee and imminent victory filled the workshop as we devised our strategy. Maps of property lines adorned one wall, financial diagrams illustrating Victoria's complex money laundering scheme another, and timelines detailing 8 years of organized theft lined a third wall like a prosecutor's fantasy. "This is about more than just your bridge now," Rebecca stated, gesturing to the evidence with the excitement of a child opening presents. "Victoria has built a classic RICO case. We're looking at federal racketeering indictments." The financial plan was brilliant in its devastating simplicity. I had the legal right to close the bridge immediately, transforming Pine Ridge into a high-priced, isolated community. The bridge was in dire need of $400,000 in overdue maintenance, work for which Victoria had been collecting funds while seemingly using them to finance her Botox treatments instead. "Here is the most elegant part," Miguel elaborated, his calculator clicking like a slot machine hitting the jackpot. "She is indebted to you for $2.7 million in bridge payments, plus the community's $847,000 in misappropriated funds, plus triple damages for fraud. The total liability is well over $8 million. In the meantime, Victoria was experiencing what could generously be described as a total breakdown. Reports from the county courthouse indicated she had appeared on Tuesday demanding to speak with a superior about harassment from rogue attorneys. Upon being informed that the investigation was valid, she reportedly shouted about corrupt government officials before leaving in her Lexus. The community mobilization was a thing of beauty. Mrs. Holloway had activated her Bridge Club contacts, disseminating the truth more rapidly than Victoria had ever spread falsehoods. Every coffee gathering, book club, and chance meeting at the grocery store turned into a strategic update. "My dear," she informed me on Thursday morning, "these women have had their suspicions for years. Victoria's designer outfits while we were being charged emergency fees, her yearly business trips to Europe. We are not fools. We just needed a leader with the courage to resist." Jake Morrison had mobilized every working-class resident who had ever been targeted by Victoria. This informal coalition comprised contractors, handymen, teachers, and nurses, individuals who earned their living honestly rather than by defrauding their neighbors. Maria Rodriguez provided evidence that would delight any prosecutor. Photographs of Victoria's professional landscaping, which involved scattering wildflower seeds on bare earth and billing $5,000 per yard. "She fined us for drying our laundry outside," Maria said, her professional composure as a nurse cracking with justified fury. She called it unsightly. This from a woman who was stealing our money for cosmetic surgery and then complaining about our clean laundry. The tapping of computer keyboards became our evening anthem as we organized the evidence into presentations so incriminating they should have carried health warnings. Every fraudulent invoice, every overstated contract, and every kickback was documented with a level of detail that would impress an IRS agent at tax time. The media plan was executed perfectly. Reporter Kate Morrison was no longer just reporting on local malfeasance. She was chronicling the most significant municipal fraud case in Colorado's history. Denver television stations were dispatching their crews. A true crime podcast titled Bridge to Nowhere was already being developed. Victoria's political shield had vanished more quickly than water in Death Valley. County Commissioner Walsh made a public declaration of a thorough investigation into governance irregularities. The state's attorney general was posing sharp questions about supervision and accountability. The whir of my old printer, running constantly, became the score for approaching justice. We assembled 47 identical evidence binders, one for each household, detailing Victoria's criminal history and showing precisely how much each family had lost to her schemes. Bridge inspection reports validated my suspicions. The structure required immediate repairs that Victoria had collected money for but had never carried out. An engineering assessment confirmed I could legally close it for safety, effectively taking the entire community hostage until someone produced $400,000. Hamilton Gray delivered the final legal blow. "You don't have to ruin Victoria," he advised, examining our evidence with professional approval. "She has already ruined herself. All we need to do is record the magnificent implosion." By Thursday evening, all preparations were complete, evidence compiled, media informed, law enforcement on standby, and Victoria cornered and desperate. Friday night promised to be more captivating than any streaming service and twice as gratifying. It was time to show Victoria the consequences of picking a fight with the wrong mountain man. Victoria's plunge into full-blown criminal desperation started on Thursday morning when she engaged a private investigator to unearth some damaging information about my past. Regrettably for her, she had chosen the incorrect individual for a character assassination. The PI, a disreputable man named Kruger who seemed to have failed the police academy admissions twice, spent a mere 3 days looking into Ezra Blackwood before experiencing what can only be called a moral awakening. "Mr. Blackwood," he stated, showing up at my door on Friday morning with an expression of profound embarrassment, "I must return Mrs. Thornfield's fee and provide you with some information." It appeared my military service record and engineering accolades painted me as a model citizen in comparison to Victoria's criminal activities. However, Kruger had stumbled upon something even more damning: Victoria's history of HOA disputes in Denver, where she had employed the same methods against 3 other communities before relocating to Pine Ridge. "She is a serial HOA predator," Kruger detailed, presenting me with a substantial file. "Denver, Colorado Springs, Boulder, it's the same strategy each time. Seize control of the board, hire family members as contractors, embezzle everything not secured, and then vanish when things get too hot." The feel of the incriminating documents was as thrilling as Christmas morning as I examined photos of Victoria's past victims and their strikingly similar accounts. But Victoria was not finished making disastrously foolish choices. On Thursday afternoon, she met with County Inspector Williams, offering an envelope with $5,000 in cash and hinting that my cabin might have structural flaws that warranted immediate condemnation. Williams, an upstanding public servant with 3 decades of experience and no tolerance for dishonesty, promptly notified the district attorney's office of the attempted bribe. "Ma'am," he informed Victoria, "I've encountered some desperate individuals in my career, but attempting to bribe a county official is a new level of foolishness. Have a good day, and anticipate a visit from people with badges." In the meantime, I was engaged in the longest chess match of my life. While Victoria was panicking and committing felonies, I was discreetly setting up security cameras near the bridge entrances and hiring Peterson Engineering for a standard safety check that would catalog every costly repair Victoria had neglected. The results of the bridge inspection were damning: structural decay that should have been dealt with annually, drainage problems that could lead to foundation failure, and railing systems that failed to meet current safety standards. The total cost for repairs was precisely the $400,000 Victoria had been embezzling for maintenance. The mechanical hum of Peterson's instruments echoed through the valley as they recorded 8 years of deferred maintenance that Victoria had been collecting funds for while using the money on designer accessories. Sarah Chun coordinated with the Colorado Department of Transportation to establish emergency access procedures, essentially giving me legal authority to shut down the bridge if safety issues dictated it. CDOT was eager to assist, especially since they had been unknowingly financing Victoria's shopping habits with highway maintenance funds. Victoria's family was imploding in a spectacular fashion. Marcus had departed on Tuesday night, taking only his law books and what was left of his integrity. Bradley was frantically trying to sell off his fraudulent landscaping company before the IRS could confiscate everything. Even Victoria's sister, Patricia, a Pine Ridge board member, stepped down with a letter that essentially declared, "I can no longer be associated with this criminal." The community intimidation effort was Victoria's last, desperate act, and signed, threatening letters began appearing in the mailboxes of my supporters, warning of repercussions for backing troublemakers. Online harassment targeted Maria Rodriguez and Jake Morrison through fake profiles that posted their personal details and subtle threats. The quiet installation of security cameras in the early morning darkness became my new routine as I recorded every single act of harassment. Victoria was producing evidence against herself more quickly than a criminal law textbook could list offenses. Her most significant error, however, was underestimating Mrs. Holloway's tech-savvy college-age grandson, Tommy, who traced the anonymous harassment back to Victoria's home IP address in approximately 20 minutes. "Grandma," Tommy declared at Sunday dinner, "your HOA president is terrible at cybercrime." The digital investigation revealed Victoria had used her personal computer to generate fake social media profiles, dispatch menacing emails, and even post fraudulent negative reviews of local businesses that stood with me. She had left a digital footprint that would make prosecutors overjoyed. Sheriff's deputies apprehended Bradley on Tuesday afternoon for defacing the Rodriguez family vehicle. He was captured on 3 separate security cameras spray-painting traitors across their windshield. The young man confessed immediately, likely in the hopes that his cooperation would lessen his mother's unavoidable sentence. The delivery of legal documents became the new ambient sound in Pine Ridge as process servers handed subpoenas to Victoria's few remaining supporters. Criminal charges were being filed faster than she could find lawyers to contest them. By Wednesday, Victoria was calling emergency meetings that no one attended, sending emails that went unanswered, and making threats that no one took seriously. Her dominion of fear had crumbled into a solo pity party with no attendees. The final blow came when she tried to contact the FBI to report me for domestic terrorism and for threatening critical infrastructure. The agent who handled her call reportedly listened for 5 minutes before advising her that she should probably seek a very skilled criminal defense lawyer. On Thursday evening, I sat on my porch, observing the lights in Victoria's house, which stayed on until the early morning hours as she presumably shredded papers and packed her belongings. The community meeting tomorrow was set to be the last act in her very public ruin. Margaret always said, "Desperate people make desperate choices." She never mentioned how amusing it could be to observe those choices. Victoria's final week of liberty was a textbook example of how to mishandle criminal allegations. Rather than vanishing quietly as a prudent felon would, she opted for a scorched earth strategy, seemingly convinced that if she couldn't possess Pine Ridge, no one would. Monday morning revealed her most far-fetched plan yet, to dissolve the entire HOA in an effort to evade legal action. She hastily submitted paperwork to the county, asserting that irreconcilable governance disputes and community safety issues necessitated the immediate dissolution of Pine Ridge Estates as a legal body. Her reasoning was magnificently flawed. She believed that if the HOA ceased to exist, there could be no charges of embezzlement. Regrettably for Victoria, dissolving an organization does not expunge felony convictions, and missing funds do not reappear just because paperwork has been filed. The sharp scent of desperation permeated Pine Ridge like the smoke from burning tires as Victoria made progressively more unstable public appearances. On Tuesday afternoon, she was seen at Murphy's Diner, loudly insisting that the owner cease serving individuals who are ruining our community. When Murphy noted that providing food was, in fact, his business, Victoria shrieked about being harassed by radical elements and departed without settling her bill. The false police calls began on Wednesday. Victoria dialed 911, asserting that I was making terrorist threats against community infrastructure because I had mentioned my ownership of the bridge at the grocery store. She reported suspicious activity at my workshop because I was constructing evidence charts. She even alleged I was trespassing on community land while I was walking on my own property. Sheriff Martinez, who had been dealing with Victoria's histrionics for weeks, finally ran out of patience. "Ma'am, making false reports is a criminal offense. If you persist with this behavior, you will be arrested for abusing emergency services." However, Victoria's crowning achievement in foolishness was her attempt to sell her house at 40% below its market value to flee before property values plummeted entirely. The clearance sale attracted precisely 0 prospective buyers once they looked into the property's legal entanglements. "Would you purchase a home?" Jake Morrison asked me with a smile, "where the only exit route might be owned by someone the seller has been harassing for months?" The sound of moving vans became the new background noise in Pine Ridge as Victoria scrambled to sell off her possessions before they could be confiscated. Unfortunately for her, the court had frozen her financial accounts due to the embezzlement inquiry, leaving her to watch as movers repossessed furniture she could no longer afford. The media battle intensified when Victoria reached out to Channel 7 News with a sob story about being persecuted by a dangerous neighbor with mental health problems. Reporter Jessica Walsh came expecting a human interest piece, but instead found the largest municipal corruption scandal in Colorado's history. Mrs. Thornfield, Walsh inquired during what Victoria had anticipated would be a sympathetic interview. Are you aware that federal authorities have named you as the main suspect in a multi-million-dollar embezzlement case? Victoria's televised breakdown became a viral sensation within hours. Her screams about fake news and government conspiracies, all while standing before the mansion she bought with stolen HOA money, became the defining image of entitled criminal delusion. The community uprising hit its peak on Thursday when Victoria appeared uninvited at my property, insisting on immediate talks to resolve this misunderstanding. She had seemingly persuaded herself that her charm and sense of entitlement could make federal criminal charges disappear. "Ezra," she said, standing on my porch in a designer ensemble that cost more than most people's vehicles. "Surely we can come to an arrangement between reasonable individuals." "Victoria," I countered, with my camera recording the exchange, "reasonable individuals do not steal $3.5 million from their neighbors." Her composure finally shattered completely. "You have no idea what you have done," she shrieked. "I will burn this entire place to the ground before I allow you to ruin everything I have built." The tremor in her voice exposed someone at last grasping that actions have real and inescapable consequences. Mrs. Holloway, who was passing by on her daily walk, paused to observe Victoria's total psychological collapse. "My dear," the elderly woman stated with a devastatingly soft tone, "what you constructed was built on falsehoods and stolen money. It was destined to crumble." Victoria's reply was to threaten legal action against everyone implicated in this conspiracy. When I reminded her that her husband had filed for divorce and her son was facing criminal charges, she started yelling about corrupt judges and a rigged system. The final showdown was set for Friday night's emergency meeting. It was Victoria's last opportunity to shape the story before criminal charges were formally laid. She had sent emails to every resident, vowing shocking revelations about dangerous factions threatening our community. What she was unaware of was that 43 out of 47 households had already been given our evidence binders. The shocking revelations were going to be about her, not me. The sense of certain victory was more satisfying than anything I had known since Margaret's apple pie. Tomorrow night, Victoria Thornfield would stand before a room filled with people she had been defrauding for years, who were now equipped with proof of every crime she had committed. On Friday evening, I sat on my porch, observing the lights burning late in Victoria's windows as she presumably rehearsed the lie she intended to tell. The mountain was still, save for the wind in the pines and the distant rumble of approaching justice. Margaret used to say that truth always finds its way out. She never mentioned how gratifying it would be to see it arrive. On Friday night, the Pine Ridge Community Center resembled something between a town hall meeting and a public tribunal. 200 people crammed into a room meant for 50, while regional news crews positioned their cameras and sheriff's deputies stood at strategic points around the space. Victoria made a fashionably late entrance in her Lexus, seemingly still under the impression she could dictate the events. She was dressed in her priciest attire, a cream-colored suit that likely cost more than the monthly mortgage of most residents, and she moved with the delusional self-assurance of someone who had never encountered genuine repercussions. A palpable sense of anticipation filled the room as she walked to the podium, as if to receive a prize, rather than to confront a firing squad of incensed neighbors holding proof of her misdeeds. "Ladies and gentlemen," Victoria started, her voice radiating the synthetic authority she had exercised for years, "I have convened this emergency meeting to discuss the vicious assaults on your elected leadership and the perilous elements that endanger our community's security." The crowd's response was swift and aggressive. Cries of "Where's our money?" and "Thief" broke out from the attendees. Mrs. Rodriguez rose, brandishing her evidence packet like a sword. "Victoria, we are aware of the fraudulent landscaping invoices. We know about the bridge funds. We know everything." Victoria's composure showed a slight fissure, but she continued with her scripted falsehoods. These allegations are the desperate fabrications of a troubled person who— That is quite enough. My voice sliced through her rambling, as sharp as a blade through soft butter. The room quieted as I rose, carrying a manila folder so thick it could have stopped a door. The sound of my boots on the wooden floor resonated as I approached the front of the room. Behind me, Sarah Chun pushed a cart laden with evidence boxes. Miguel Santos configured a laptop to display on the overhead projector. The reinforcements had come. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, addressing the assembly, "I want to tell you about a bridge." I opened the folder and took out my grandfather's 1943 mining claim papers, displaying them for all to see. "This is the deed that establishes my family's ownership of the bridge that connects Pine Ridge to the outside world for the past 81 years. Audible gasps spread through the room. Victoria's expression shifted from confident to bewildered to horrified in about 3 seconds. "For the last 15 years, I went on, the Colorado Department of Transportation has been remitting bridge maintenance payments to Pine Ridge Community Infrastructure LLC. That is Victoria's sham corporation. She has been embezzling funds that are legally mine, $2.7 million. The projector screen flashed with financial records detailing every single fraudulent transaction. The crowd's murmurs grew into an angry clamor as they comprehended the scale of Victoria's theft. "But there's more," I added, savoring every moment of Victoria's escalating alarm. "Mrs. Thornfield has been operating a criminal organization under the guise of community enhancement. Every single project, every contract, every special assessment, all were structured to channel your funds into her family's accounts." Miguel came forward with a laser pointer, tracing the financial diagrams that illustrated Victoria's embezzlement scheme. The total theft from community funds was $847,000 over 8 years. Her brother-in-law's surveying firm, her son's landscaping company, her husband's legal charges, all were inflated by hundreds of %. Victoria attempted to interject. "These are fabricated documents. This is a conspiracy to— Ma'am," Sheriff Martinez interjected, moving forward with handcuffs glinting in the fluorescent lighting. "You have the right to remain silent. I recommend you exercise it." The room burst into applause as Martinez recited Victoria's Miranda rights. The charges included embezzlement, fraud, bribery, filing false police reports, and racketeering. Federal prosecutors were also drafting additional charges for interstate wire fraud and money laundering. The metallic click of the handcuffs fastening around Victoria's wrists was the most satisfying sound I had heard since Margaret's laughter. The woman who had sought to ruin my life was at last being held accountable for her actions. "You can't do this," Victoria shrieked as deputies escorted her towards the exit. "I'll contest this. I'll appeal. Victoria," I called out, halting her tirade. "You should probably conserve your strength. You're going to need an excellent lawyer." The audience's laughter pursued her out the door and into the patrol car, where camera flashes captured the conclusion of her reign of terror. County Commissioner Walsh approached the podium to declare the immediate disbandment of Victoria's HOA board and the formation of a temporary governance committee. Criminal prosecutors would collaborate with federal authorities to retrieve the stolen money and restore it to the community. "Mr. Blackwood," he said, looking at me, "what are your plans for the bridge access?" I stood up, observing the faces of my neighbors who had endured Victoria's despotism for years. "The bridge will stay open, but Pine Ridge will acquire proper ownership at fair market value. For $50,000. Those funds will be placed directly into a community scholarship fund." The standing ovation went on for 5 minutes. Mrs. Holloway dabbed at her tears. Jake Morrison thrust his fist into the air. Maria Rodriguez embraced her children, at last liberated from Victoria's harassment. The glare of camera flashes chronicled the moment Pine Ridge reclaimed its spirit from a thief who had nearly destroyed it. Outside, Victoria's patrol car vanished into the mountain night, taking with it 8 years of corruption and fear. Justice had finally arrived in Pine Ridge, and it had come in handcuffs. 1 month later, Victoria Thornfield appeared in Jefferson County Court, clad in an orange jumpsuit that clashed horribly with her refined tastes. She entered a guilty plea to charges of embezzlement, fraud, and bribery, choosing to avoid a trial that would have dragged on for months and brought her even greater public humiliation. Judge Hamilton Gray, my old Army friend who was now presiding over Victoria's case, showed no leniency for HOA despots who defraud their neighbors. The sentence was 3 years in state prison, $3.5 million in restitution, and 500 hours of community service clearing debris from highways. Marcus had already made a hasty retreat to Denver with his reputation in tatters, while Bradley was now earning minimum wage at a gas station, seemingly getting his first taste of honest labor. The sound of children's laughter now echoed where Victoria's mansion once stood. The community had acquired the foreclosed property and transformed it into Pine Ridge's first public park, featuring playgrounds, picnic spots, and a memorial garden dedicated to honest leadership and neighborly cooperation. The renovation of the bridge became Pine Ridge's most significant community endeavor. Residents dedicated their weekends to assist with tasks ranging from concrete pouring to painting railings. Jake Morrison managed the construction efforts. Mrs. Holloway coordinated food deliveries for the workers, and Maria Rodriguez's nursing expertise was invaluable for the occasional construction mishap. The newly elected HOA board, chosen in a sweeping victory for transparency, introduced radical ideas such as competitive bidding, open financial reports, and monthly meetings that encouraged genuine resident involvement. The change was remarkable. Community initiatives that Victoria had quoted at $50,000 were now being finished for $8,000 by reputable contractors who were glad for the legitimate business. Property values shot up by 15% within 6 months as news of Pine Ridge's shift from corruption to collaboration spread. Newcomers were drawn specifically by the community's dedication to democratic principles and financial accountability. The waiting list for homes became longer than a checkout line during a snowstorm. My own personal change was a surprise to everyone, most of all to me. The isolation brought on by grief had transitioned into a reluctant role of leadership, as residents consistently sought my guidance on matters from contractor disagreements to local governance. The workshop evolved into an unofficial community hub where neighbors came together to address issues in the traditional way by communicating with one another as decent human beings. The aroma of fresh coffee and camaraderie replaced the bitter atmosphere of animosity as Pine Ridge recovered from Victoria's oppressive rule. Mrs. Holloway's widowed sister, Sarah, and I had started spending a significant amount of time together, exchanging stories of loss, fortitude, and the second chances that life can present when you are least expecting them. The effects extended well beyond our mountain enclave. Bridgegate was adopted as a case study in property rights law curricula nationwide. The Colorado legislature enacted the Pine Ridge Act, mandating financial audits for HOAs and criminal history checks for board members. Other communities grappling with similar corruption began to seek our advice on how to resist petty tyrants. Documentary producer Rebecca Martinez acquired the rights to our story for an independent movie called The Bridge to Justice. The initial payment was channeled directly into Pine Ridge's scholarship fund, which had already provided full scholarships for 3 local students to attend college. Victoria's thievery had unintentionally financed the education of the next generation. Local enterprises flourished without Victoria's coercion and kickback arrangements. Murphy's Diner transformed into the informal community headquarters, holding monthly democracy dinners, where residents talked over local matters while enjoying home-cooked food. The economic upturn was significant. It turned out that honest leadership was beneficial for business. Justice served came with a measure of sweet irony. Victoria was released after serving 18 months for good behavior. She was compelled to live in a small studio apartment and work in retail, permanently barred from serving on any board or nonprofit organization. She had become a living warning about the dangers of unchecked power and avarice, precisely the fate she deserved. The crisp mountain air was now filled with the sounds of a vibrant community. As I sat on my porch one evening, watching the sunset paint the peaks in gold, my phone rang. It was another call from a distraught homeowner in Arizona dealing with similar HOA corruption, this time concerning water rights instead of bridge ownership. Mrs. Holloway, now the democratically elected president of Pine Ridge, came by with a freshly baked apple pie and some words of support. "Ezra, that community in Arizona needs your help. We have everything under control here." I gazed at the bridge crossing the valley, now correctly maintained and managed with integrity, linking homes where neighbors engaged in conversation instead of plotting against one another. What are your thoughts, Margaret? I murmured into the mountain breeze. The response seemed to come from the children playing in Victoria's old garden, their laughter echoing across the water that flowed unimpeded under an honest bridge. It was time to assist another community in learning that sometimes the underdog does prevail, but only when they choose to fight with intelligence rather than with rage.